Well, let's get an independent assessment of the Conservative and NDP platform costings released today. And to do that, it's just 10 days, of course, before the vote. Let's bring in Kevin Page, who was Canada's first parliamentary budget officer. He's now the founding president and CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy at the University of Ottawa. Good to see you again. Thanks for being here. Let's start with the Conservative platform. And you have a grading system that you use, which is interesting. So what grade do you give it?
Well, we're still in the process of grading because the embargo hasn't been lifted that long, so we're still writing. But it definitely will be a pass, and I think it probably merits a good rating for fiscal responsibility. There is a commitment to get back to balanced budget. That is a harder fiscal target for many people than a declining debt to GDP ratio, and there's spending rules built into that. I think, and again, I think it gets a pass on the assumptions and a pass, so to speak, on transparency, not higher grades than that, but overall, it gets an overall pass grade.
Right, the transparency, Patty, those are always concerns you raise, and this one I'm assuming is the same when you raised about the NDP, that it's only 10 days out, should have been released earlier. Yeah,
I think right from the get-go, absolutely, you could. It's too late. It should have been released at least a week ago. But I think more than that, I think what we saw today, we saw a lot of transparency, and kudos to the Conservative government when they announced initiatives, their big tax cut initiatives, the universal tax cut, or changes to tax credit rates on home heating fuel, or more benefits for maternity and paternity. Because there were a lot of transparency, there's press releases and backgrounders and PBO costing. And today, again, if you roll up the numbers, we saw, annually over the medium term, like $20 billion worth of savings. Most of that coming from the spending side, big cuts to infrastructure, big cuts to government operations. These are commitments. So transparent in the sense they're telling us they have to do this to get back to balance. They're willing to do it. But actually a lot of risk along the way to find those savings.
Tell me about that. What red flags do you see here about this platform?
Yeah, I think it's the fiscal strategy of saying that we need to do this. Balanced budget is really important over the medium term, and we need to do this in a way that promotes competitiveness and productivity. And again, if you look at how the measures roll out over the platform, we front-end load the deficit finance tax cut, so people like me are going to get a tax cut, starting as early as next year. And then the big cuts that come to infrastructure in the outer years to get back to balance into government operations. So again, if you really want to boost productivity, you want to strengthen growth in Canada's growth prospects in the future, you don't cut in infrastructure in half. And
let's come back to the infrastructure, but on the tax cut side, deficit-funded tax cuts, but aren't they all doing that?
They're all doing that.
So it's they're all kind of in that same boat. Yeah. They're all providing tax breaks for some sector of the Canadian economy and some people in the economy with borrowed money, basically.
Yeah, and I think we begin some of the other, and I agree, and I think why we score this a good rating for fiscal responsibility, I think they're making a case that our economy is relatively strong, we shouldn't be running these deficits, we're not going to eliminate these deficits too quickly, but again, that temptation, I still want to, I want to address this affordability issue, I want to cut people's taxes, I want to get that in earlier in the platform, and the difficult stuff comes later in the platform.
Talk to me about the infrastructure piece again. That's a signature sort of part of this, $18 billion in savings over 5 years, I think it is, by pushing. They're not saying they're cutting any infrastructure spending. They're just going to push it out over 15 years instead of 12. How do you view that?
Yeah, it's just kind of strategically not a good decision. I mean, from the point of view of growth prospects. Again, if you think about how the fiscal weight of infrastructure and the importance in the economy, the feds are spending roughly $10 billion a year annually now over the medium term, which is up significantly because the Liberals have put in these additional spends on infrastructure. The municipalities, the provinces, they love it because they're dependent on this sort of money to deal with their infrastructure needs.
Although they fall back on the platform saying the current PBO is saying that that it's hard to know whether that money's gone out the door, where it's gone, how much good it's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, they're relying on that, I think, as the sort of political cover to say, look, it's not working anyway, so we're going to get it back together, make sure it works, and spread it over more time.
Yeah, but they're saying we'll get it back together. I mean, absolutely address the problem. If the problem is getting this money out the door, having good infrastructure plans, working with the provinces and municipalities in a better way, that makes sense to me. But if the plan is to say, okay, we're just going to cut in half the federal spend from $10 billion to about $4 or $5 billion, which will be left in the framework after these large cuts. That's definitely going to have an impact, and so not necessarily be the best choice to get back to balance. And then on the other savings, they're basically freezing staff levels in the public service,
selling off real estate,
and some of these, changes to procurements. Like some of these measures have been around a long time. Those are not easy savings. What is easy to do is to change, the tax law come budget 2020 and reduce taxes or changes tax credits, et cetera. Actually, to find those savings and to roll those savings that are back-end loaded, that will be difficult to do.
So bottom line, is this if there's disagreement on approaches, is this a credible?
It's credible, absolutely. Yeah. So, but people, again, should know what they're buying into. And again, the size of those savings in the outer years, again, people like me, we look at those numbers, like that's a double-digit cut to what we call direct program spending, over this 5-year period. That's a big cut. So there will be impacts to national defense. There will be impacts to environmental, spending, fisheries and oceans. Like that's where those cuts play out in direct program spending. If you look at that, how much money will be left under the Conservative platform in the 5 years, relative to the size of the economy, we're going back to the 1990s. So it's a pretty significant cut.
NDP platform, got some more costing out on that today. I know you looked at it. What does it get? What kind of grade?
We finished that. We had this longest. We have a note up. It's on our website. We give it an overall pass rating. So it definitely passes with respect to like these assumptions, and it gets a close pass on fiscal responsibility. Again, weak on the transparency side, and on the fiscal responsibility side, again, it's based on a declining debt to GDP ratio. But one thing they have in there is a lot of prudence, which we've seen in none of the other parties. They're saying we recognize a lot of these measures that we're trying to do on the spending and revenue side. There's a lot of uncertainty, so we're putting in this big prudence factor. But yeah, on the transparency side, they're saying that literally they can get $30 billion out the door next year. Again, $30 billion, we're a $2.3 trillion economy. We spend $330 billion a year. That would be historic. And again, a lot of it, in terms of additional revenues, it would be like, we're talking about new taxes that we've never seen before, and e-commerce taxes, wealth taxes, luxury taxes.
So again, credible, it hangs together, but
yeah, but we've never seen anything like that before.
I'm curious, so they built in, you saw prudence in it. Which is we don't see in the other plans. I'm curious to why that's significant these days. Like, what if you don't put prudence in and your budget plan is shot all to pieces? Just go spend more money. Just go borrow more money. Yeah. Ride up the deficit further than it is because there's no back to balance plan. Yeah. So, what does prudence in a platform actually say?
Well, I think it should be prudence around an objective. So if your objective is to get to a balanced budget target and you're telling people you're serious about it, I think that we found through the 1990s, early 2000s, certainly a finance minister and then Prime Minister Paul Martin found, like, if you tell people you're going to hit these targets and you hit these targets, the bond markets, they love it. People plan based on those things. It's a confidence builder. Yeah, it builds confidence.
Yeah. Okay, Kevin Page, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.